Today's episode brought to you by Conduit Clothing. Have you ever gotten clothing and you think it's going to be really nice to wear, like really comfortable? That's happened to me multiple times, especially when it comes to team apparel for my various rooting interests. I get those clothes, like the hats in the mail, and they are just really uncomfortable. That's not the case with Conduit Clothing. Not only do they have high-quality clothing, like the Flex Fit Rucker hat that I've worn probably more in the last 3 weeks than some hats that I've had for 2 years, they also have a really important mission behind the company as well, and that is to get as many Bibles into the hands of unbelievers as possible. That's why every order at conduitclothing.com ships with a hardcover ESV Bible. Their evocative design on all of their clothing, and they have a huge selection at conduitclothing.com, will hopefully lead to some crucial conversations and an opportunity to give that Bible away and let the lion out of its cage. Visit conduitclothing.com, sponsoring this episode of the AM Update. It's Thursday, September 25th, 2025. Oh my goodness, is it actually happening? Are we on the cusp of indictments for Democrats who deserve them? Also, more left-wing terrorism unfolds in Texas, and a huge bust in New York City this week in a new term I've never heard of. We'll talk about all that and more next on the AM Update. I'm not trying to be morbid, but is this just me, or does it seem like we can't go 2 weeks without another example of left-wing political violence or violence as a result of left-wing policies? Yesterday morning, a sniper opened fire from a rooftop on a U.S. Immigration Customs Enforcement Dallas field office. The shooter fired indiscriminately at the ICE building, including at a van in the port where the victims were shot. 3 detainees, these would be illegal aliens detained by ICE, 3 detainees were shot. 1 detainee is deceased, and the other 2, as of yesterday evening, were in critical condition. The gunman was found dead with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. So shell casings were found with anti-immigration and customs enforcement messages on them. Definitely an attack on ICE, even though ICE were not the victims of this. Just a couple of evenings ago, California Governor Gavin Newsom joined Stephen Colbert on CBS to say that ICE needs to be targeted.
That's happening in the United States of America. Masked men jumping out of unmarked cars, people disappearing, no due process. No oversight, zero accountability happening in the United States of America today. People ask, well, is authoritarianism, you're being hyperbolic? Bull, we're being hyperbolic. If you're a black and brown community, it's here in this country. And so I'm deeply proud that I had the privilege of signing the nation's first bill to address the issue of masking. Also to require you have simple identification, to your point. I mean, if some guy jumped out of an unmarked car in a van with a mask on, tried to grab me, I mean, by definition, you're going to push back. And so these are not just authoritarian tendencies.
So there is California Governor Gavin Newsom on Stephen Colbert's CBS Late Show just a couple of evenings ago, saying, of course people are going to push back. I think that's what he was talking about. Of course people are going to push back when masked men are getting out of unmarked vehicles. Gavin Newsom signing into law recently something that would attempt to, I don't think it's going to actually have any teeth, make ICE agents unmask. Why would my ICE agents need to have masks on anyway? Why would they need to have masks on? Well, it's because the morning after Gavin Newsom delivered those remarks, a sniper opened fire at immigration and customs enforcement officers in Dallas, Texas. Of course, there are rabid individuals, especially when you're dealing with the cartels. There are rabid individuals who are going to try to shoot to kill any immigration and customs enforcement officer. And Gavin Newsom knows exactly what he's doing there. At a gathering in North Carolina yesterday, Vice President J.D. Vance absolutely having none of this just cockamamie from people like Gavin Newsom.
And I think that is the most disgusting thing. The very people who keep us safe ought to be honored and protected and praised by Democrats and Republicans alike. It is time to stop the rhetorical assault on law enforcement. Because here's what happens. Because here's what happens when Democrats like Gavin Newsom did say that these people are part of an authoritarian government. When the left right-wing media lies about what they're doing, when they lie about who they're arresting, when they lie about the actual job of law enforcement, what they're doing is encouraging crazy people to go and commit violence. You don't have to agree with my immigration policies. You don't have to agree with Donald Trump's immigration policies. But if your political rhetoric encourages violence against our law enforcement, you can go straight to hell, and you have no place in the political conversation of the United States of America.
Indeed. And there is Vice President J.D. Vance once again channeling what a lot of people are thinking right now. Well, is it finally happening? Are we finally getting to the bottom of draining the swamp? Can I use every single idiom of the past 10 or so years? The Justice Department is reportedly seeking to indict former FBI Director James Comey for perjury as the deadline to bring charges looms. The probe into Comey centers on whether he lied to Congress during his September 30th, 2020 testimony about his handling of the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. Under federal law, prosecutors have 5 years to bring a charge, with the 5-year mark occurring next Tuesday. The case is being handled by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Virginia. According to a source speaking to Fox News, quote, DOJ officials are close to deciding whether to prosecute former FBI Director James Comey for allegedly lying to Congress in 2020. There's a grand jury underway looking at the matter in Virginia. A decision could come any day. My question is, why are they leaving this right up to the nub of the deadline? I mean, my goodness, Pam Bondi, what you doing there? What are you doing? In North Carolina, lawmakers have passed a bill named Irina's Law in their effort to eliminate cashless bail in the wake of that fatal stabbing of a Ukrainian refugee in a Charlotte rail carriage last month. Of course, you'll recall there's been a lot that's happened between, this has just been a couple of weeks that this was a viral story. Irina Zarutska killed by suspect DeCarlos DeJuan Brown on a light rail train on August 22nd in what investigators described as a random act of violence. He's been charged with first-degree murder. The bill calls to eliminate the condition to release a defendant on a written promise to appear and to provide for a new procedure to have defendants with suspected mental health issues to be evaluated for involuntary confinement and other measures as well. The bill was passed by an 82-30 vote in the North Carolina House and heads to the desk of Democrat Governor Josh Stein. So hopefully that's a step in the right direction. I have no idea whether that Democrat governor will actually sign that bill into law. This is a story I meant to talk about earlier this week, and it's a term that centers around a term, something I've not heard often before, if at all. Secret Service agents have dismantled a network of electronic devices at multiple locations around New York City that could have been used to disable the city's cell phone network. They said the system was also used to anonymously convey assassination threats against senior U.S. officials and for criminal activities. In 5 locations within 35 miles of New York City, Secret Service agents discovered more than 300 co-located SIM servers or SIM farms and 100,000 SIM cards. So these are the little cards, those identification cards that almost every cell phone up until recently has to basically identify itself to cell carriers. They said the system, these SIM farms, could also be used for criminal activity, and that 80 grams of cocaine, illegal firearms, computers, and cell phones were also found amongst these various locations. 100,000 SIM cards. To just give you an indication of what that could look like to any network like Verizon, AT&T, 100,000 different cell phones controlled ostensibly by one actor. That is some stuff out of James Bond movies right there. Quickly, this before the break. Here is Hillary Clinton making the rounds once again, and she says we need to all pump the brakes.
We have got to stop demonizing each other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, that is some great rhetoric. That's some great rhetoric, and I'm really surprised to hear that from the former Secretary of State. Continue on.
Now, I think most of that right now in our country's history is coming, from the right.
Oh, no, we suck again. We need to stop demonizing each other. Also, all of this demonization is coming from one side. Okay, thank you very much. Well, when we come back... crocodile tears from Jimmy Fallon and why I'm not taking his opening monologue seriously at all. He's not sorry. And I don't think you should feel sorry for him or take him seriously at all. Also, why being conservative doesn't automatically mean being Christian. Also, we'll have our results from the poll of the week. That's coming up next. Today's episode brought to you by Conduit Clothing Company at conduitclothing.com. You know, the parallel economy is already here, and the left has existed in their own parallel economy for a long, long time, basically my entire adult lifetime. Just look at what happened with Jimmy Kimmel over the past week. They have their own insulated parallel economy that they've enjoyed for a long time. We need to start building our own, and that is already well underway with companies like Conduit Clothing. Even the clothes that we wear, we need alternative solutions for where we source those from. Not only do Conduit Clothing products have a really cool design that will hopefully lead to some really cool conversations, spiritual conversations with your unbelieving friends and coworkers, they also just make clothing that's really nice to wear. They have a huge selection of clothing, whether it's now that we're getting into the cooler months, a hoodie, or I like the dry fit shirt that they have, the long sleeve shirt that they have. That's really comfortable as well. Plus, every order ships with an ESV Bible, a hardcover ESV Bible. They have a mission of getting a Bible into as many hands as possible. You can learn more about what it means to be a conduit for Christ and look at their fine selection of clothing at conduitclothing.com. That's conduitclothing.com.
A moment over the weekend, a very beautiful moment. I don't know if you saw this on Sunday. Erica Kirk forgave the man who shot her husband. She forgave him. That is an example we should follow. If you believe in the teachings of Jesus as I do, there it was.
I don't think you follow the teachings of Jesus, Jimmy Kimmel. Now, let me get this out of the way to begin with. I'm glad that he actually brought up the most important event from over the weekend, and that is Erica Kirk forgiving her deceased husband's assassin. That is important to highlight, and I'm glad that message got out there. Here's why I'm not taking Jimmy Kimmel seriously. And you should not react to that with, oh man, that's so sweet, and he's tearing up, and maybe he really actually has a soft spot in his heart now. No, he didn't do anything close to apologizing for what he did last week. He didn't. He did not apologize for lying about what was known then, as it was known 72 hours before he spread that lie, maliciously and in a partisan manner, that Tyler Robinson was MAGA. That was a malicious lie. And then he went on to just cruel jokes at the expense of Charlie Kirk's friends and supporters. And cruel jokes, that's whatever you want to do, man. Whatever you want to do. But lying maliciously and for partisan political gain, that's just not all right. And he didn't apologize for that. And so no. I'm not taking you as serious as I can throw you, which is not very far, probably. Check out this. This is a post from Colin Wright from the Manhattan Institute, writing about and summarizing a new study from the American Sociological Association. This is an official journal called Sex and Sexualities from the American Sociological Association. And this journal, and this recent entry in this journal, is calling for the elimination of the idea of childhood sexual innocence and the social ethical taboos against children engaging in sex acts. Here's what Colin Wright of the Manhattan Institute says. Quote, "The authors of this study lament that most scholarship, quote, marginalizes childhood sexual pleasure and views children as vulnerable subjects. They argue that we must interrogate dominant narratives of sexual innocence that suppress young people's desires, and instead recognize how children negotiate pleasure and meaning amid intersecting hierarchies of age, race, gender, and class. They reject what we call adult-centric, adultist approaches to sexualities and insist that childhood pleasure is indispensable for an inclusive sociology and just sexual features." So this is an entry at Sex and Sexualities, a journal from the American Sociological Association. The title of this, I guess you could say, survey, this paper, is called Childhood Sexualities on Pleasure and Meaning from the Margins, written by Divya Bana and Stefan Luke. Do you want me to read the rest of this? Colin Wright, reporting on this new paper, says the central theme of the paper is pleasure. This aligns with trends in international sex education policy, particularly the International Planned Parenthood Federation's Comprehensive Sexuality Education Program, which explicitly shifted away from sex education centered around reproduction and towards what it calls sexual expression, sexual fulfillment, and pleasure. Pleasure is one of the 7 core elements of CSE. That's Comprehensive Sexuality Education from Planned Parenthood. Its youth program, applying to all young people, irrespective of their age, declares a quote-unquote right to pleasure and the right of all young people to enjoy sex and express their sexuality in the way that they choose. Colin Wright says it's therefore no surprise the paper's authors frame the very notion of childhood sexual innocence as barriers to progress. Couple of thoughts real quick. Thank you again to Colin Wright from the Manhattan Institute for writing this up on this paper from the American Sociological Association. First of all, it sounds like to me that Miss Divya Bana, co-author, and Stefan Luke, co-author, need to have their hard drives examined, like in their computers. That's the first thing. The second thing is just pretty obvious. This is just an academic kind of accoutrements of academic writing. This is just a way of making the most craven and depraved sexual fetishes sound academic. And sure, maybe the authors come to the conclusion that, well, prevailing winds in the society means that we can't do this, and so it's probably best to leave it here. But this stuff happens all the time. It's just camel's nose under the tent. You start just let a little bit of this into academia, and then a little bit of this becomes a lot of bit of this. And yes, I know that's a slippery slope fallacy. It's not a fallacy, slippery slope. I mean, you ask your English teacher, hey, why is it not okay to use a slippery slope argument? And your teacher will say something along the lines of, maybe not these exact words. Well, if you start using a slippery slope fallacy or argument, then eventually it's going to lead to your argument being undone. Didn't you just use a slippery slope argument fallacy in defending against the use of slippery slope? I mean, that's how this starts. Dressing up the most depraved, wicked, evil ideas in a veneer of academia, and bada bing, bada boom, it's in the water table. Let's go to this, a little bit of a palate cleanser. Dr. Michael Clary is the lead pastor of Christ the King Church in Cincinnati. And he has been on a roll recently, especially when dealing with the tragedies that have befallen our nation in the last few weeks. Had a great video out about what do we do? What's the real source of the murder of Charlie Kirk? He's back again this week with, I think, another very appropriate and timely message. You know, TPUSA is a very unique organization. Started politically, changed to more of a spiritual and ministry thrust, or at least there's a bigger part of that organization now that wants to move more into the direction of strengthening the faith of its followers. And so you've got this really weird mix of people who came attracted to the politics first, and now understanding that there's a spiritual dimension as well. And it's in the midst of this message that I think this is very appropriate for this time. It's only about 90 seconds. This is Dr. Michael Clary, lead pastor of Christ the King Church in Cincinnati. Listen to this.
Let's say you're a patriot, you're conservative, you voted for Trump 3 times, you're a loving family man, family woman, you respect your parents, you're a good guy, you're a good woman. Listen, conservatism will not save your soul. There are people in hell that were great patriots, heroic citizens, courageous people that rejected Jesus Christ. Being a conservative won't save you. Conservatism is the fruit of Christianity. It is not Christianity itself. There's a very important difference that we need in this day because we're desperate for allies and friends that will join in the fight. And just because somebody's kind of in our foxhole with us to assume, oh, they're a Christian, not necessarily. And so these blessings that we enjoy, they're not incidental to Christianity. They are the expressions of Christianity applied to public life. But I will say this, everything good and decent and noble and orderly about our society, everything that you love about being an American, all the things you value and enjoy and appreciate. All of those are undeserved gifts of grace from a generous Father. The only way for a conservative unbeliever to be saved is precisely the same way that a leftist unbeliever is saved. It is by submitting to King Jesus, bowing the knee, repenting of your sin, humbling yourself, and asking God to forgive you. And so I'm calling you to embrace and submit to the Father who has given us these great blessings. You already appreciate the gifts, now appreciate the giver, and he will not refuse you.
Amen. That's Dr. Michael Clary, lead pastor at Christ the King Church in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I think that's a really important message for these times, that you might be a right-winger. Right-winger does not mean Christian. You might even be Christian adjacent. That doesn't mean you're a believer. And I hope that anybody who is in this audience will take the time to search out for a church, a real community a local community of believers that knows what time it is. And finally, our poll of the week, in the midst of RFK Jr., President Trump's announcement at the White House earlier this week. Turns out they were preceded not only by Harvard, their medical school. We talked about that yesterday. They were preceded in their warnings about acetaminophen by Tylenol. Oh my goodness. Tylenol had like 4 different posts from their official then Twitter account from like 7 years ago where they cautioned mothers, or specifically to mothers. They were responding to mothers saying, hey, just talk to your doctor first before you take any Tylenol. Tylenol. It's because we don't know what acetaminophen does. We haven't studied it. So not only, and I've seen more now studies just coming out, it's just nobody, this is kind of like the banning food dyes thing. We kind of knew that, don't take acetaminophen during pregnancy, to try to avoid it. It's kind of like banning, we could have just done this any time. There was enough prima facie evidence there. We could have banned this stuff or advised against it at any time. The only reason is we had a bunch of numbskulls, cowards in our public health establishment who didn't want to follow through. So I asked you, will we see the rate of autism decrease during our lifetimes? I gave you 3 options and an opportunity to comment. Yes, people are waking up. No, we're in too deep a hole. Or it just kind of stays the same as it is now. In last place, 13.4% said it's just going to be the same as it is now. By the time our lives are over, there's going to still be the same rate of autism. 31.2% say, no, we're in too deep a hole. And 51.4% say, yes, people are waking up. I'm in that camp. I think there are a lot more people who are ready and willing, not enough, but a lot more people, significantly more people, who are ready and willing to, at the very least, question the prevailing narratives when it comes to science and medical advice. Let's go to what you said. Right Wing Dad says, no, we're not going to see a decrease in rates of autism because half the population will refuse to follow the advice of the other side and what they present. I think that's a little bit too cynical. It's not as if we saw multiple pregnant liberal women this week downing bottles of Tylenol. So, Right Wing Dad, you're just a little too cynical there. Brian says, at the root of a lot too many, almost all evil is money. So as long as there's money in it, autism will continue. Dylan says, other. It depends on how the definition evolves. That's an interesting point. What are we going to define autism as in the future? If it's more broad, then we'll see higher rates. If it's more narrow, then we'll see fewer. I'm just talking about in the actual, I guess we don't really know what autism is. It's a spectrum. Valeria says, I'm more concerned that this kind of long-term neurological damage is the cause of the rise of the Karens over the past 2 decades. Might be right. Lauren says there's a vaccine connection that needs to be explored. And I've seen people, this study that Harvard did that we talked about yesterday, they did not control for vaccine status. And that's kind of a big red flag. But again, there's an argument that this is just kind of the opening volley and trying to figure out what causes autism and trying to win people at the same time. The frog in the boiling kettle type of thing. Here's what I mean. One day, the White House comes out and says, hey, acetaminophen might contribute to autism. Everybody's like, oh, that's stupid, but whatever. The next day says, next time we meet at the White House. I said, well, it might be acetaminophen and certain vaccines. And you already started to see Trump say that. He was very clear this was his opinion. But hey, let's maybe explore taking the MMR shots separately instead of all together. Let's just, there's no downside here. And then the next time they come out to the White House and they say, well, this particular vaccine, along with Tylenol, it seems like from what we're seeing, that might have a contributing factor to autism, but there's no downside. Let's just pump the brakes on this one for a little while. Unless you meet this, and this criteria, you really don't need to get this jab. You see what I'm saying here? Just creep. Put this into the water table over and over and over again. Eventually, people will wake up one morning, if they're consistent enough with this, and realize, hey, there are no vaccine mandates nationwide. And there are very few vaccine recommendations for babies. That is one school of thinking in terms of what President Trump and his public health leaders are trying to accomplish here. Vanessa, will end with Vanessa. Only if the large number of parents who falsely claim their child is autistic, often to gain benefits or draw attention to themselves, are removed from the equation will we see any decrease. This widespread phenomenon, Munchausen syndrome by proxy, the world has ever seen. To be clear, Vanessa says, I'm not speaking about parents of children with legitimate diagnoses, and I don't mean to diminish their struggles in any way, but in my experience, the majority of so-called autistic children I've encountered seem developmentally typical. And while I personally believe vaccines carry serious risks of their own, my comment here isn't meant to dismiss that issue. It's simply pointing to another major factor that clouds the picture. Vanessa, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something that I had not considered. Because you're not saying that there are not legitimate cases of autism, and you're not also saying that vaccines don't necessarily cause autism. You're just saying that there is a large phenomenon out there that kind of goes under the radar. Goes under the radar that there are a lot of people, a lot of parents that claim their children have autism, that maybe it's not the case that they actually do. So that's an interesting point, and I think that's a good place to end at. Tomorrow is another edition of Ask or Tell Me Anything. You can ask me any question you want. Tell me any news story you think needs to be covered on the AM Update. Make your submissions over at Real AM Update on X. That's at Real AM Update on X. Have a wonderful Thursday. Back at it again tomorrow. I'm Aaron McIntire, and this is the AM Update.